Liz, welcome to the Leaders Lab.
Thanks so much, Ken. I'm happy to be with you.
Yeah, Liz, I mean, you've been in numerous publications. You had a TED Talk with over 500,000 views that I got to watch yesterday. So many accolades, mostly around, I see around conflict resolution, dealing with difficult people. But I'm kind of curious where this all began. Like, how did you become the conflict lady, or the anti-conflict lady, I should say?
Oh, that's much better. It sounds more complicated, but yeah. But I'm not against conflict. We need it. Um, I'm sure some of this came from being an eldest,
Yeah.
and wanting there to be peace and everybody to do the right thing. Um, I did not start out trying to have this role. After college, I worked for a marketing firm. Um, of course, there was plenty of conflict at work, and I wanted things to go involved in figuring out how to break up the conflict, how to get people to get along with each other, um, whatever it would take to make sure that we could serve our clients appropriately and take care of end user customers because those were the important people. So, of course, we needed to work toward taking care of them.
Yeah.
Um, and over time, it just became clear that the work went better when somebody knew how to smooth things out and help people bring conflict to the fore. I mean, if it goes underground, that's the worst. You
Right.
make no progress.
Well, I liked what you said, even when I was saying the anti-conflict, and you said, "Well, you're not against conflict," and I feel the same way. Like as soon as I said it, I'm like, through conflict sometimes comes progress, right? It's just ongoing or unresolved conflict that's the problem. But I wanted to ask you because you said it a little bit tongue in cheek, but it does sound like when you were growing up, you were kind of the peacemaker, right? I mean, did you feel like you had like an innate ability to maybe understand other people's points of view and to somehow find some middle ground for them, or like what was that for you?
I'll have to ask my siblings. Um, I don't think I was actually the peacemaker
Yeah.
necessarily. I think I just wanted things to go the right way.
Right.
And I think I was raised in a household where it was a norm that if people needed help, you helped them. And if they weren't being heard, it might be appropriate to speak for them,
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that there was attention to what they needed. It was a social justice household, I would say. So that idea of helping bring people forward so they can put their own issues on the table, that was important. And I also think that the idea that everybody deserved to have a voice was important to me. And yet, Ken, one of my jobs, this was my hardest job ever.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was 23 years old and I was responsible for a 300-person call center.
Wow.
And there was no dearth of, problems and conflicts and arguments and whatever there. And I don't like conflict myself. I'm personally conflict avoidant. I actually have to remind myself to follow my own prescriptions.
Sure.
Um, but if you wanted people to have a decent day, you had to deal
Right.
and just make things smoother or at least more honest so everybody knew what was happening.
Yeah, I think it's funny because I think I would class myself the same way. Where sometimes when, as leaders, or as anybody, that they don't have to be in a leadership position, but if an individual is not one to run from conflict, right? Meaning there's an issue here, let's talk about it. I think what that can look like to other people is, again, attracted to conflict. And it's actually the opposite for me, at least. I'm one of those people who I think, like you, the festering is what drives me
Right.
crazy. The unspoken, the elephant in the room, but we're not dealing with it. Or, like you said, sometimes there are people that you can maybe see or understand their point of view, and they're having a tough time getting it across, right?
Yeah.
And that maybe I don't want to say they need to be spoken for, but certainly when you're a leader, sometimes giving them the platform or the freedom or the emotional space, right, to be heard.
Sometimes nudging them.
Yeah,
As the leader, sometimes you have to require someone to speak up.
right,
You know, think of the O-ring situation on the Challenger. People were silenced.
right,
And so there was a huge tragedy. I mean, most workaday stuff is not that significant. But one of the other things is that if you can teach people skills and they get better at it, they stop classifying so many things as conflict. They just work it out.
right. One thing I thought was super interesting in your TED talk was, and I want to get back to you, kind of your career timeline, but this just dawned on me. One of the things that in your TED talk that you talked about was, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm gonna pause just for a second. Okay, so Liz, you're in the call center. You've got hundreds of people. Obviously, it's almost like boot camp for conflict resolution. It sounds like. Where does your career take you next?
Oh, okay. So I did a whole bunch of jobs in that marketing agency. After that, I was responsible for client services. When I left there, I was EVP. It was time to go out on my own. That firm was undercapitalized and the owner died, and it just didn't make sense to stay. Um, and I knew people who were consulting marketing, um, and they subcontracted stuff to me. I was working a week after I left and never really stopped. But my practice shifted from marketing and more sales related stuff to, I'm going to call it for this conversation, what gets in the way. You
Sure.
know, how do you organize people so the work gets done well? Because what I found was I could be working with a client on issues in their call center. But if there were problems outside the call center, there might be nothing you could resolve from the inside that would
Sure.
actually be good enough for customers, for example. So when I could get an ear of a leader, I would explain the bigger situation. And over time, you know, I just zoomed out and then was doing a lot of leadership support, leadership development, strategy sometimes. It depended on the organization. What were the pain points? What needed to change? Who was willing to change? And so, what could we do with the situation?
So for you personally, it seemed like that was just a natural progression into what felt like kind of a North Star, or almost I don't want to say a calling, but certainly something that was really congruent with your own abilities, and that you felt like you could make an impact, and it's evolved ever since. So yeah, tell us a little bit more about, like, because now you've got this TED talk that's got a 500,000 views. That is no easy feat. What year did you record that? And tell me a little bit about that process.
So, can you labeled or named my situation and evolution really well? The TEDx was in 2017 in the fall. I think that's right. And I had been consulting and doing executive coaching for a while
Mm-hmm.
from that point, um, up to that point. And a good colleague of mine was asked to speak, and she was already signed up for another TEDx. So she recommended me, and it was just very lucky. Um, and the thing about a TEDx is it's got to be focused because you don't have long.
Right.
And it was really such a lesson to me about how people want a few points to focus on, to anchor themselves to. And so, something I've just done recently, I just did the launch for a new animated miniseries. Um, and the website is betteratworkwithliz.com.
Oh, cool.
And it takes these kinds of workplace situations that we're all familiar with and breaks them down. Um, and I'm a character, and there are other characters, and I have a magic scarf that because I always wear one, so it became a very useful prop for purposes of the story, you know. But the point is to give people something they can use right away.
What do you see as you got into this work, like more and more? I mean, even starting with the call center, I mean, maybe especially at the call center because it was such a big data point in a way, right? Because there's so many people in one environment, right? And probably, and not to classify everybody with the same brush, but probably more entry level workers, so probably less evolved when it comes to learning conflict resolution and stuff like that. I would think, but who knows?
Don't
Um,
assume. Don't assume that.
but my point is, you probably saw everything back then. I feel like and how did that as you learn those things, what are some of the most common things you see in the workplace when it comes to conflicts that maybe shouldn't have even been a conflict in the first place, which is probably most of them, I would think. But like, what are some of the common things you see that cause conflicts in the workplace?
One of the most common themes, and um, I would encourage you not to assume that entry level people have a harder time learning how to deal with this. Often it's people with power who
Sure.
don't realize what they are stirring up with their power.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Um, and, the entry level people, they want you to be happy with them.
Right.
So most of them, I mean, you always get a few that you really wish you never met,
Sure.
but in general. So one of the biggest things is people not understanding how they come across, not knowing what I call their turning radius, where they're knocking into somebody else, creating a bad time for somebody else, or they haven't articulated what they wanted. So a lot of this comes down to emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
Are people self aware, and can they self regulate? And the people who can do that are in fewer conflicts.
As far as it comes to emotional IQ or EQ, what are some of the most common? What are the strongest traits to have? As far as your emotional intelligence, like what are some of the best practices? I guess as it comes to that, is it understanding the other person's model of the world? Is it I don't know. What you tell me?
Um, I'll tell you the ones I rely on
Mm-hmm.
and teach about all the time. The first one is really about self management. And particularly if there's a problem afoot, we react as if we are under threat. I mean, threat for our lives.
Sure.
And that kind of heightened, activated state is not the best for coming up with solutions unless there is actually a fire, an intruder, those kinds of things. So, one of the most important is a kind of settling the body because so much of threat manifests in the body. Your stomach churns or your throat tightens, um, all of those things. So getting people to be able to calm their bodies and to notice the signals their bodies are sending them, that's a big one. And then the second one I would say is an awareness of what's happening around you. And one of the, we all see the world through our own eyes.
Sure.
Curiosity has been one of my greatest gifts. And I encourage everybody to really pay attention. And that goes back to your point of learning what's going on with the other person.
Sure.
Because if you come at them, whether it's physically, emotionally, verbally, they've got to protect themselves.
Sure.
And when they are in that defensive crouch or protective attack, they can't hear what you really need to say. So being aware of them, hugely important. And being willing to listen to what they need to tell you and also what they're not telling you and being able to draw judgments from that. Those are like the first two big chunks.
Well, I noticed in there was a lot of takeaways in what you were saying, but something that clicked for me and what you were saying was, that people literally look at this sometimes like, it's life or death, or, but the building's not on fire. Does this go back to like our fight or flight senses going all the way back to like caveman days? But now we don't have dinosaurs chasing us. We have people dissing us on Instagram or something, right? Like, so,
100%.
yeah. I had a mentor that, and sometimes it's usually the simplest phrases for me that just stick in my head, but he just said, he's always asking himself when he gets in these kinds of situations where it's just like, what else could this mean? Right? Like that person didn't show up and do their
Yes.
job.
Yes.
What else could this mean? I mean, any number of things, right? And I feel like our brains sometimes, or I guess I'll speak for my own, but we tend to go to the worst case scenario sometimes, right? It's like that report was due on my desk at 2 o'clock and now it's 2:30 and it's not here. And it's because they don't care, they're lazy, whatever. And there's so many other solutions or possibilities, right? Things that would be going on outside of work, things that would be going on in their own department. But we usually go there. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm kind of trained in this stuff, and I'll still go there
Yep.
and then catch myself. Right. The
Yep.
only thing I've gotten better at is catching myself. You know.
So that's fantastic. That's what humans can do. We can learn to catch ourselves and to recover faster. There's a psychologist teacher named Rick Hansen who talks about, if you are in the jungle or um, out on the plains, whatever, and you hear something rustling, might be a snake, might be a stick. If it's a snake, you won't be around tomorrow to look for anything nice.
Right.
You won't be around for pleasure or satisfaction or anything. So our entire mechanism is geared toward the snake.
Right.
We've got to keep ourselves alive. The very act of saying, oh, not a snake, I'm okay, I'm safe, that in itself reduces more conflict
Sure.
than anything. It's that kind of self possession. Um, we do tend to assume the worst about others, even though we would hate it if they did that with us.
Right. And I try to think that way too, because, listen, I'm a prompt guy, but I've been late. I'm a person that delivers, but there's been times where I haven't delivered, right? There's been, I mean, if we've lived enough, we've come up short at different times. And like, how would we want to be treated in that moment, right?
Right.
So super interesting. So when you started getting involved, I'm also curious when you made the shift from you're in a marketing company, you shift to, I'm assuming your first clients are hiring you because you're a marketing professional, you're an EVP, and they're hiring you under that premise, but you're shifting them more into it sounds like it went from marketing to kind of a hybrid of marketing slash maybe a little bit of project management to maybe full board coaching. How did that happen? And did you keep the same client base and expand on that, or what did that look like?
That's such a smart question. Um, so it was an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't pay attention to it myself in the beginning because I was just trying to get better answers so that the service or sales or whatever group could do better work. In the beginning, it was just geared toward you have a better picture, you understand better, you can do
Sure.
better work. But then you see how various challenges manifest as they continue to flow downstream. And if you can fix them further upstream, you just reduce the problems, and that creates more upside for growth, whether that growth is skills or profit. And so when clients trusted me enough and were interested, so then I would just be in more meetings about bigger topics than just the way to sell or service whatever it was we were working on. And so that happened over time with people I was already working with. Yes. Um, and, one of my clients I've been with for at least 30 years
Wow.
in all different kinds of ways,
Right.
reorganizing the company, um, leadership development, leadership succession, every, you know, lots of different kinds of things. Uh, Part of what I like to think about is if you're improving the thinking, the work gets better.
Right. And not just the marketing work. I mean, I guess what I'm thinking is
That's right.
the way I'm envisioning this as you're talking about it is okay, so you started working early on a marketing project. While you're working on that project, you realize there's a bottleneck because of some communication issues, structural issues, whatever it might be. And you're like, look, we're never really going to be able to make this effective. Or even if we do, it's just going to revert back or whatever,
Right.
unless we fix the top of the funnel versus just the output that you're hiring me for. And then as you do that, they realize like, oh my gosh, this work we did with Liz not only helped us on the marketing side, helped us on the delivery side, helped us on sales, helped us communicate better as a team. And then that was there a point where like the company actually did a pivot and like changed your whole offering or again was it just an evolution? Like did you go from being a marketing company to a consulting company one day like rename and stuff like that or was it just
Oh, no,
no?
no, no. It's always been my name. So I could do, oh, Ken,
Yeah.
this will sound bad, but so I could do what I wanted.
Sure.
Um, I like assignments where people really want to make a difference and want to change. They know they are dissatisfied with current conditions. They know something could be better. And the people who are open to learning about themselves and how they can react differently, it's a beautiful thing to see that happen.
Oh, of course.
So I don't care what the work is called.
Yeah.
I want that experience. And it's just been so lucky and gratifying to be able to have it for such a long time.
So what's the pitch or first of all, who's the core I mean, I guess this obviously could go anywhere from small business to Fortune 500 and I think it does. But what is kind of your niche when it comes to like a typical client and what are they coming to you for specifically? Like during an intake call, what does that look like? Hey, we're broke, we're not communicating well. Like what does that look like?
I'm going to start with the second part. The most common, this is very reductive, of course, is one group is not getting along with another group.
Mm-hmm.
And it could be an in house group with their client or their customer. It could be two departments, two functions where their goals, compensation, et cetera, set them at loggerheads. Um, it could be leadership and everybody else because we feel stalled and we don't know how to make progress. We think we have a great project, but it's not moving forward. Um, it could be that executives are having problems with each other and need facilitation to sort it through. But it is almost always that there is some kind of discomfort, disagreement. We're not sure how to work it out after they've lived with it for a while.
Yeah. They've exhausted a lot of internal options by the time they've come to you, I assume.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Which is great for me, um, because then they really are more open to hearing about it. The kinds of places where I work now, currently, um, I seem to have developed an expertise in family businesses. And some of these are very large.
Right.
I mean, they're not all like a mom and pop place really can't afford to pay for, a big consulting project. Um, but I like family businesses because people are so committed
Mm-hmm.
and they have strong traditions to draw on and they really care about the work.
Right.
But they get in their own way, that's great. I also do a lot of work with nonprofits and then it's often a kind of board management conflict where something is not working smoothly and they've felt kind of bad for a while.
Are there times in your line of work where, I mean, obviously the idea is help people understand each other's worlds, right? And find common ground and all of that. I have to imagine through all these years of doing this, There's got to be times where the report back is like you've just got a bad apple in a particular chair, and unless
Yeah,
they're gone, yeah, because I mean, it can't always be resolved.
right. That's not the majority of cases,
Sure,
but there are those. And you could have, I'm not going to call it bad apple, I'm just going to call it the wrong person in the wrong chair.
sure,
Sometimes they don't belong there at all because there are some people who, in a sense, are such a misery to themselves.
right,
They can't be good with anybody else. And when they are finally removed from the circumstance, it's like the whole place exhales.
right,
And you can just see people moving forward. Sometimes it really is a person, not necessarily a, every once in a while you get an actual bad person, a
right.
person who lies, a person who cheats. As soon as you find that, you got to get rid of them fast. It's more painful with the person who just won't do the work, won't step up,
Right.
is in the way of other people. That can be painful. They can be long term employees, but it is remarkable when a person who has helped hold everyone back is finally gone.
Yeah, and I found that I was talking to somebody about this the other day, a friend that owns a business, and I think sometimes leaders that would classify themselves as empaths, so nice maybe, the cost of being nice when you let someone continue on is not nice at all. I mean, it's sort of like you're being nice to one to hurt 99 out of a
Yep.
100-person company. And and so we hide behind, I don't want to have the difficult conversation is really what's going on, because I don't want to have this conclusion that I may have to redirect this person either out of the company or into another role or whatever. But in the meantime, I see it as, from a leadership perspective, as like a weakness,
Yeah.
because true leadership would be, of course, we're going to be compassionate and fair and figure out what's going on and try to see if we can make them successful. But when we don't go there, it's like the other 99 people that are doing good work that should be there. We're hurting. We're not only hurting them, we're hurting our relationship with them. Right? It's almost like if you're
Yeah.
one kid out of six and the parents have a different set of standards for one of the kids, the other five are just going, what are we? I mean, what about us? Right?
Yeah. This is a hard thing. You don't have to be an empath to want to be kind
Right.
and to not want other people to think you're the mean, bad boss.
Right.
And the other thing that happens often with kind people is they're trying to save somebody.
Yes.
If we can make them just a little better, it'll be so much better. But sometimes even that isn't better enough.
I had that so
And
bad early in my career, not to interrupt your thought.
no,
Savior
that's right.
complex. Oh
Yeah,
God.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's so understandable.
Yeah.
The challenge, exactly as you lay it out, is other people are hurt by it.
Right.
And one of the things that has been helpful to me, naturally, I tend toward um, a structuralist's view. So sometimes it's much easier for me to come with this large perspective and without the history and to make the case of the damage that is occurring to the institution
Right.
and the ways in which everybody could be lifted if this pain wasn't there. And then, exactly as you say, you just have to do the fair thing with the other person. I don't know why companies are so hesitant, for example, to have generous severance arrangements.
Right.
If you pay somebody enough money to give them time to find the next thing, it salves your guilt.
Right.
They go on, they have a better life in most cases,
Right.
and everybody else rises now that they're not being held down so much. Yes, sometimes there are people we can't help, and that's painful to a kind leader who truly wants to give that kind of bridge to someone. Work is so important to our egos, and it's how we take care of ourselves. But if it's holding everybody else back, it's not the right decision.
Yeah, and that person that's not performing, that's not magically going to change overnight, you're not really doing them any favors. You're prolonging the inevitable. I remember, do you know the guy? He was really popular in the '80s, '90s. Brian Tracy. Remember Brian
Oh,
Tracy?
yes, eat the frog one bite at a
Yeah,
time
yeah,
guy.
yeah. I went to a seminar of Brian Tracy's, and I had an employee that was not good. He was impacting some of the others. Not good in our business. Good guy,
Yep.
not
Yep.
great in our business. Not horrible though either, which is a big problem, right?
So,
Not
yeah.
the report card wasn't clear. It was like a C minus, but perpetual C minus. You know, what I mean? Just over and over and over again. And I remember I got a moment with Brian Tracy one on one, which was really cool. And I'm like, I'm going to ask him about this employee, you know, what he thinks. And of course, he doesn't know this person, right? So all he said was, Ken, just ask yourself the question that, based on what you know of their capabilities and personalities, if they did everything to the best of their ability, could they ever be a model employee for you? And I just, as soon as he finished saying it, I was like, they just can't. Like, they just, this just isn't in them. They can go on and be really successful somewhere else, but what I had for him just wasn't a fit, basically,
Yep.
right? So all I was doing was just dragging my feet and dragging my feet. And we've had a couple this year. I remember I had one. We have very low turnover, but I had one a few months ago, and it was interesting. Another guy that I sometimes we get this thing, I call it halo effect. You know, there's one thing that someone does really, really well, and so you
Yep.
ignore everything else.
Yep.
And I kind of like halo affected this guy because he did have some really good skills, but then eventually just wasn't the right fit. And what was interesting is, and we had done all the stuff. Like, I felt really good about our efforts in terms of training, mentoring, assigning a peer mentor, all that stuff. But then it came down to like, okay, this is it. So do I just let him go? And instead of doing that, I had a conversation with them about, I just want you to be honest with me, and I'm going to be as fair with you as humanly possible. Is this a fit? Do you even like what we're doing? Do you like what you're doing? And he went to the immediate, like I could see his body, and this is such a credit to him. His body went to the thing that most people do when they're in trouble, which is defense, right? Like, you haven't given me enough time, this and that. And he went there, and I could see him stop and pause in his mind and like took a breath, and he went, you know what? I don't know that it is, and it's not you guys. Like, I don't know if it's the right industry for me. I don't know if I'm on the right career path. And so we had a whole conversation about that. We ended up doubling his severance because I just so appreciated
Mm,
that him being forthright and just being honest and just laying his cards on the table and making it so easy. And like, we left and it was a tiny bit emotional because I was like, what a good guy. Still the right
right.
decision, but what a good guy, you know?
Right. And you can make a smooth exit
Yes.
that is less damaging to him, to you, to the organization. Yes,
Yeah.
that is worth cash.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it was to me. And it wasn't a huge amount of severance anyway. And it was one where then I would say, I'm going to double up your severance, but help us out in the transition, right? If we need
Great.
to, and he was there and he helped us.
Great.
And yeah, it was so good.
Yeah. The other kind of character that can cause a similar problem, I see this with some frequency. A senior executive is hired from some other company where they've been very successful. May or may not have been exactly the same industry, business model, whatever. They're hired for their success, but it is not clear upon hiring how much that success was contingent on the exact specific conditions that were in that other place.
Sure.
The challenge sometimes of integrating them can be tremendous, particularly if their skills are bound up in like a playbook and this is how I do it,
Right.
and the organization tries to adapt to them.
Right.
but doesn't really, you can waste a lot of time and money, a lot of money,
Right.
thinking they will incorporate themselves. Either the most senior leadership or the board has to be able to work with them, open their eyes, and integrate them to the way it really is here, learning lessons from them as you can, but requiring them to learn the business they're now in,
Sure.
or you should make the decision pretty soon. Sometimes that goes on for years. They just need to get used to it, et cetera. And you can lose a lot of good people that way who see that there's no hope.
Totally. I place a lot of people in C-level positions. So the Leaders Lab, our main thing is talent acquisition, leadership talent acquisition. And one of the things I'm constantly looking for, especially at the SVP level,
Right.
EVP level, and C-suite, is we know the resume, right? We've got it. 20 years in this and that, and managing a
So many
P&L of 100
millions.
million, and
Right.
yeah, all of
Right.
that. We got it. Can you go in and win the hearts and minds in an industry that you haven't been in before? So I think also it's that leader's responsibility to go in and walk in and say, yes, I've been successful. And you can be confident and humble at the same time, right?
Yes.
I'm confident in the abilities that I have. I'm confident and proud of the accomplishments that I've had. But you know what? I don't know anything about
Right.
network marketing,
Right.
and you guys do. So teach me.
Right.
Teach me how to do this. Be my mentor in this one area. And yes, we're still going to have standards, and yes, I'm still the boss, but you guys are going to be my industry experts, and you're going to walk me through how to do it. And I think I was just having this talk with someone more on a personal side over the weekend. I'm like, I feel like all long-term respect is mutual respect, right? Like I think demanding respect is a weird thing, kind of,
Right.
right? It's not a one-way street.
Right.
And so to me, as a leader in a new opportunity such as you described, like you've got to give it to get it. And you normally got to give it first, whether you think you should have to or not. I mean, I think if you
Of
don't lead with it, you're
course.
not going to get it.
Yes, absolutely right. And the same is true in terms of the functioning of the business. I mean, I'm in all different kinds of businesses where I know nothing about what the work is.
Sure.
I can say organizationally, this is how things usually go. I can explain all kinds of things about how people think, why they do what they do. It's somebody else's business. It's
Right.
their shot to call.
Right. No, such a good point. And yeah, one that I see that get messed up a lot. And one of the things that's what I mean when I'm interviewing at that level, I'm trying to get a sense of, is the ego so large that they've gotten beyond that point somehow of being relatable, right? Being so okay. So we talked about a lot of the mistakes, and I know we're getting close on time here, but what are some of the things that you see companies do really, really well? What are some of the things that kind of light you up? Like, oh my God, you guys are getting it, when it comes to conflict resolution and just good communication in general.
I'm going to use the example you gave of hiring these senior people. A question I like to ask is if I talk to your people, the people who reported to you, what would they tell me?
Oh yeah.
Okay? The idea that a leader's team speaks well of them. We're not talking about the sycophantic way.
Right.
We're talking about really talks about what it means to me to work for that person, what I have learned from that person, what I see, and how I have seen them change. When you see leaders change and their team gets it,
Mm,
that's a beautiful thing. That's really exciting. When you see, just as you talked about this guy that you had to exit, um, when you give someone a piece of feedback that they did not see about themselves, and you see them pause and take it in when they would not have been able to do that previously, that's fabulous.
sure.
When they take over the process themselves, you know,
Yeah.
that's the best.
That's really cool. I've also noticed when you're doing, I love what you talked about talking to their team. I used to do that when I was in the corporate world. you want to get a feel for how a leader is performing. Instead of sitting in the GM's office going through the P&L statement, get out in the plant floor and start talking to people.
That's right.
And to me, there's three kind of general categories that I put feedback into when it comes from the front line. One was praise for the leader and it was genuine, right? That's what we love. So, oh God, Liz has been so great. She goes out of her way to help. And they almost can't say enough, right? About how much
Mhm.
they love working for that person. The other one is something kind of negative, right? Well, I don't know. I haven't seen him too much lately. Hasn't been around. I didn't get my performance review. The other one, which I think is equally as scary, is an inability to or unwillingness to communicate anything. So silence.
Yep.
Silence to me is the same, if not worse, than negative criticism because negative criticism is I've got a bad boss, but I at least feel safe enough here to express that to somebody, right?
Yep.
I'm not getting my commissions on time or whatever. The silent one, I think, may have contempt not only for that leader but for the organization. Like there's a lack of trust of them even wanting to express it. Have you seen something similar?
Absolutely. And part of what goes so bad in those circumstances, when someone has contempt for their leadership and then for their job, and they stay,
Right.
whether it's expressed or not, they have contempt for themselves.
Sure.
Getting them out of that negative spiral is so challenging because even if you change the bad boss, there's a kind of PTSD that can sustain itself for quite a long time if you have a long-standing work group that is all beaten down and
Yeah.
feels terrible.
Yeah. I found that scenario to play out a lot when I was in corporate. We were doing a lot of acquisitions. And let's say the company we bought already had a culture that maybe had some challenges in that
Yeah.
regard. Now they're being bought by a bigger company who, to them, maybe in their minds, is just a larger version of what they're already going through. And I remember I used to have the kind of conversations where it would be like, I get it. The company that we purchased or whatever, did not live up to X, Y, and Z for you. And I get that you're upset. And maybe this is the right place for you, maybe it's not. But in any case, you're going to end up in a new position sometimes. Why not that day be today? Do you know what I mean? Like, why not like give it a shot? But I think a lot of times it's leadership owning past failures. Sometimes when you get rid of that toxic leader, as an example, I think one of the best things the person above them can do is go, guys, without trashing the person ever, that would be unprofessional, but by saying, there were shortcomings on our leadership team, right? And that's my fault, and we know we let you guys down in some different ways, right? And here's what we're doing to work to change it. We love your feedback, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that ownership and transparency is critical to like move past those kinds of situations and get people out of that spiral.
It's the start, Ken, but then there has to be sustained attention.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? Because you can say those things, but if they don't see you, and it doesn't have to be in person, it can be on video. If they don't see you showing up to keep hearing how it's going for them,
You might
it's
as
like you
well have
gave them
said
a
nothing at all.
lollipop.
I agree. It's actually worse in a way because they're like, I've
Yes.
heard this before now.
Yes. You open the
I'm,
door.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gave me a twinkle of hope, and then you shut it down again. So now I'm
Yeah.
not falling for this again, right?
Right. Right.
Right. Amazing. So great to talk with you. I could geek out on this stuff forever. So I appreciate it. If there's anything I can ever do for you, please let me know. And we're going to put all the ways to get in contact with you in our show notes. Anything you wanted to close out with, Liz, before we get going?
Um, I appreciate your questions. They are good questions. And some of them I have not been asked before, so I always like that. I think people, I'm going back to the conflict theme
Hmm.
for a close. I think people are afraid of conflict because they think of it as battle,
Right.
but it doesn't need to be at all. It is just people getting along when they care deeply about something. So relying on goodwill and putting in the time and attention really can make such a big difference. And then you build a practice of normalizing disagreement, and it
Right.
feels okay.
I love that. I love that. I had a boss once. I'm not trying to extend this for. I did have a boss once. I'm going to tell you a quick story because I love this story. But this is shortly after I went from being an entrepreneur to being in a corporate environment, right? And I was at a GM level and I got invited to like a director's level meeting. So I was going to be the, I don't know, maybe the guy with a star that I might be moving up at some point, right? And I remember my wife, who is so supportive and never like really gives me advice necessarily in my career, is just a big cheerleader or whatever. But she said, I'm pretty outspoken. And she said, hey, you're going there probably so they can observe you to move you up to the next level. So you might want to be a bit of a fly on the wall on this one. And I was like, that's probably not a bad idea. Right. So I get in there. I'm about this is like a 3-day meeting, Liz, of like, just pounding stuff out, once a quarter
Mm-hmm.
meeting. We're about a few minutes into the first day, first hour of day one. And they were talking about something that I just thought was asinine and nobody was speaking up, and it was my body language, I guess. And my boss, I think my boss's boss, who ended up being a great mentor for me, at some point he notices my body language pretty early and he goes, do you have something to add to this? And I said, no, no, just here to, hey, fly on a wall, whatever. And he said, yeah, we didn't fly you out here to, like observe. So lay it on us. And so in a professional way, I, made my case for what I was arguing about. And then for the next course of the next 3 days, I was super engaged, super involved, and had disagreements with him, had conflict with him, with the guy running the meeting, but also very, very friendly and mutual respect, right, through these conversations.
Yeah.
I get back home and my wife said, how'd it go? I said, it either went really well or really bad. Like there is no gray area, right? Like I'm either moving up or I'm moving on probably. But I decided, and I did it while I was speaking, that if this environment didn't appreciate, passion, in a business like way and conflict in a business like way, then it probably wouldn't be the best place for me anyway. I don't want to just sit there and shut up, right? So I get a call the next day. It's him, and he said that was like the best directors meeting we've had. I love that you engaged. I'm trying to get these guys, so it was the right culture.
Yeah.
But that stuck with me. I ended up staying there for like 14 years, primarily because of
Oh,
that, guidance and conversation and understanding that I was in a culture where it was okay, to challenge the norm. And it was really cool. But that was kudos to him. That wasn't kudos to me
yes,
for speaking up. It was
that's
kudos
right.
to him for creating an environment that not only allowed it, but encouraged it.
Right. You had the confidence that he could take it.
Right. No,
Otherwise, right?
yes. And he said, now sometimes when we break from the huddle, we're all running the same play, right?
Yes.
Regardless of what
Yes.
I said, you got it. I just want to be heard, right? I just want a seat at the table.
Yes.
And if you give me that, of course, like, I'm not going against what we decide as a group.
Yeah.
So cool. Well, thank you, Liz. Amazing talking with you. And hopefully our paths will cross again soon.
It's been a great conversation.
All
Thank you,
right.
Ken.
Thank you, Liz. Take care.